This is another in our series of lectures, Illusions, Delusions, and Confusions, about cartographic myths on old maps. A cartographic myth is a geographic feature that appears on a map but not on the earth. Kingdoms and cities where none ever were, or lakes and rivers where there is but dry land. These cartographic myths had many sources, including the confusions of explorers misinterpreting what they saw, as well as delusions created by wishful thinking. The cartographic myth we will consider in this lecture was created by both of these factors, resulting in the belief in a large but non-existent sea. Christopher Columbus's discovery of America was an accident. He was actually trying to get to China and the Indies by sailing west from Europe. We can see the problem he ran into on this 1507 map by Martin Waldseemüller, which happens to be the first map to use the name America, and of which the only known complete copy is the one on display in the Library of Congress. If one tries to get from Europe to Asia by sailing west, one is blocked by the Americas. In the 15th and early 16th century, Europeans were not particularly interested in the New World. What they really wanted was to get to the riches of China and the Indies. Thus, many of the early explorers setting out from Europe were actually trying to figure out how to get around or by America in order to reach the Orient. A closer look at that part of the map, which shows what was then known of North America and the northern part of South America, can help us understand the story of many of the early explorations of the New World. In 1519, Alonso Alvarez de Pineda sailed westward from southern Florida, hoping to find a gap in the coastline allowing access to the Pacific, such as the one shown here by Waldseemüller. Instead, Pineda ended up finding a continuous coast, proving that there was no outlet from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. Looking at this map, we can see why the next thing Europeans tried was to head north along the east coast until they reached the end of the land, at which point they would then be able to hang a left and sail right into the Pacific Ocean. This is exactly what the King of France set Giovani Verrazzano to do in 1524. Verrazzano sailed along the American coast from the northern part of today's Florida all the way to Newfoundland. He discovered many things, but no waterway to the Pacific. Shortly after the return of the Verrazzano expedition, Giovanni's brother, Girolamo de Verrazzano, who had accompanied Giovanni on his explorations, created a manuscript world map incorporating the results of the 1524 exploration. There is a record of such a map being given to King Henry VIII in 1525, though that map has since been lost. What we do have today is a map from 1529, also by Girolamo, showing the same thing, a manuscript chart now in the Vatican Library. If we look at the detail of the North American coast, where the Verrazzano expedition sailed, we can see a strange feature. Now, the original manuscript is hard to read, so we'll look at this area from a facsimile that was made of the map in the early 20th century. Here we can see what is a narrow isthmus of land just north of Florida, with a large body of water on its western side covering most of what we know today is the interior of North America. This large body of water is the subject of this lecture. It is usually called the Fall Sea of Verrazano. To understand how this came about, we have to remember what was in the minds of the members of the Verrazzano expedition. They were seeking a route to the Pacific Ocean along the eastern coast north of Florida. So as they traveled up the American coast, they were constantly looking for a way to tack left and sail into that western ocean. One of the things to realize is that the ships of the day could not sail very close to the wind, so they were unable to simply set a course paralleling the shore as they sailed north. Instead, the ship had to tack in and out as it sailed north. While this illustration is exaggerated, it does demonstrate that there were sections of the coast which the expedition did not see on its exploration. This helps explain why Verrazzano missed both the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware Bay while discovering the Verrazzano Narrows into the Hudson River. In any case, early in the voyage, Verrazzano ended up off the coast of one of the barrier islands in today's North Carolina. Across the island, he saw a large body of water with no apparent western shore. This is today's Pamlico Sound, but having the Pacific Ocean always in the front of his mind, Verrazzano jumped to the conclusion that that was the ocean that he was seeing across the island. As he continued up the coast, Verrazzano missed all the gaps between the barrier islands and soon came to where there was only mainland. From this experience, Verrazzano concluded that what he had seen was a narrow band of land separating the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. As he later wrote in a letter to King Francis, he believed he had, quote, found an isthmus a mile in width and about 200 long, in which from the ship was seen the Oriental Sea, which is the one without doubt which goes about the extremity of India, China, and Cathay. It was this supposed isthmus and the belief that the Pacific Ocean came to within about a mile of the Atlantic midway up the American coast that is shown on the manuscript chart. It was Verrazzano's report and this mapping which created the cartographic myth of the Fall Sea of Verrazano. In 1540, Sebastian Munster published the first printed map to focus only on the New World. It was also the first printed map to show the Fall Sea of Verrazano. Despite Verrazzano's fame and Munster's good reputation, this cartographic myth was not followed by many mapmakers, and it fairly quickly became discredited. That is, among most Europeans, but not among the English, who hung on to this false belief for another century. In 1582, an English map by Michael Locke showed North America with a prominent depiction of the Verrazzano Sea. This map was published in Richard Hakluyt's rare publication, Diverse Voyages Touching the Discovery of America, in which Hakluyt explained that Locke made his rendering based on, quote, an old excellent map which he, that is Verrazzano, gave to King Henry VIII and is yet in the custody of Master Locke. This would have been the reported Verrazzano manuscript map from 1525, and Hakluyt wrote that the map, quote, layeth out the sea, making a little neck of land in 40 degrees of latitude. This configuration is what Locke shows, clearly depicting the Pacific Ocean extending nearly to the Atlantic, separated only by a narrow isthmus of land, with the Western Sea labeled Mare de Verrazzano, 1524. Hakluyt and Locke were very involved in the efforts to stimulate English colonization in the New World, both by way of a desired Northwest Passage and also by means of this reported narrow land bridge between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This map dramatically helped their case. Another map was produced for that same purpose, a manuscript map drawn the same year by John Dee, an alchemist, astrologer, mathematician, and all-around occult arts practitioner who held a prominent place in Elizabethan England. This map provides another example of the current delusional ideas the English were dreaming of as possible routes to the Orient. Dee intended his map to be a propaganda vehicle to demonstrate to the English court the feasibility of voyages from England to China. In support of that argument, he showed North America as a veritable Swiss cheese of waterways. Naturally, he included a large rendering of the Sea of Verrazzano, but he also offered a number of other possible water routes across the continent. This included the St. Lawrence River, with one branch extending down to the Sea of Verrazzano, another branch flowing up to a bay on the north coast where it joined the fabled Northwest Passage, and the main river arising in a large lake in the middle of the continent, out of the opposite side of which another river flows all the way to the Gulf of California. To the south of the Sea of Verrazzano, Dee shows another lake, with a river flowing from it to the southeast and emptying into the Atlantic, and on the western side, two other rivers, one flowing to the southwest into the Gulf of Mexico, and the other flowing straight west and reaching almost the Pacific coast of Mexico. Dee's depiction of waterways across North America was perhaps the most outlandish ever done, and no printed maps ever took up his mapping. However, the map does nicely demonstrate how the Elizabethan English were hoping to find a very short, easy route to the riches of the Orient by way of the east coast of North America. Over time, this desire was combined with an interest in having an American base from which to harass the Spanish in the New World, so plans were soon afoot to establish an English settlement in North America. Sir Walter Raleigh was one of the biggest proponents of this, and in 1585 he sponsored an expedition to found a colony to be named Virginia in honor of Queen Elizabeth. Naturally, the location of the colony was intended to be near what was then believed to be, narrow land bridge between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The 1585 expedition and then another Raleigh-sponsored expedition a few years later were both failures, but the desire for an English bridgehead in that area continued. So in 1606, King James gave a charter to the Virginia Company of London to found a colony on the American coast between about 34 and 40 degrees latitude. This charter included the rights to the, quote, land throughout from sea to sea. The Virginia Company established the Jamestown settlement early in 1607. Initially, the colony had a hard time surviving, so little headway was made in discovering the route to the Pacific. But the English clung to their belief that there was such a route, and a relatively short one at that, and this is wonderfully depicted in this map of the colony from 1651. To understand this map, you have to realize it is oriented to the west, with the north being to the right. This places the Atlantic Ocean at the bottom, with the Chesapeake Bay lying horizontally just above it. The reason that many of the maps of the American eastern seaboard were oriented this way is that the map was laid out essentially as the land would appear as a European approached it by ship. From the deck of a ship, the shoreline would run left to right in front of you, so many map makers thought it made sense to draw their maps to match this perspective. With the Atlantic Ocean at the bottom, at the top we see the Sea of China and the Indies, that is, the Pacific Ocean. You can see that it is very close to the Atlantic Ocean, and this is actually confirmed with a legend on the map that says, quote, its happy shores are within 10 days' march of the head of the James River. It wasn't until 1669 that the Virginians finally got around to actually exploring to the west. That year, the governor of Virginia, Sir William Berkeley, sent out a German physician who had settled in the colony, John Lederer, to explore the Appalachians and beyond, specifically in order to find a way to the Pacific. Lederer naturally did not find the route to that ocean, which actually lays 2,500 miles further west. After this, even the English gave up the idea that there was an arm of the Pacific Ocean, a Sea of Verrazzano, reaching near to the Atlantic, and this cartographic myth finally disappeared from maps. Thank you for watching this Philadelphia Print Shop online lecture, which we hope you found interesting and informative. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. If you would like to see a selection of original antique maps, please visit our website at pps-west.com.